Welcome to
Hi.
another episode of Bookish. I'm here. This is Laura, and I'm here with our friends Sylvia and Kofi. Today, I'm going to do our little introduction. We're going to be talking about Gabriel Bump's novel called Everywhere You Don't Belong. And that's the, oh, works backwards. Okay. That's the book. Okay. Um, so Gabriel Bump grew up in South Shore, Chicago. He received his MFA in fiction from University of Massachusetts Amherst, and his first novel, Everywhere You Don't Belong, was a New York Times notable book of 2020 and has won the Ernest J. Gaines Award for Literary Excellence. He also won the Great Lakes Colleges Association New Writers Award for Fiction, and various other awards for this novel. He loves baseball, basketball, birds, and long strolls. And that introduction is on his faculty website at University of North Carolina. Yeah, so that's a little bit about Gabriel, and we actually are very lucky that he's going to be visiting Howard Community College on Thursday, September 22nd. There is a keynote. He will be doing a keynote address for the Bowder Lecture Series in Smith Theater on campus. 12:30 to 1:30, and I believe that event is open to the public and it's free. So I invite you to check out the information on HCC website for that event information.
Um, Listening to the introduction and reading the book and reading some of the blurbs that people gave the book, I was struck by how much of it felt like a YA book, like it was like a young adult novel. It was definitely a coming of age story, and in a way, I wondered if I was the audience for this book.
Hmm.
And I've had this thing about coming of age stories that seem to be similar in thread. Like, you have a young person growing up in a city. The family is not necessarily dysfunctional, but just kooky in their ways. I'm thinking about the grandma. I'm thinking about Paul in the early parts. And then the protagonist goes through these trials and tribulations, and it felt like a very familiar narrative. Um, but I also felt like the book was really, I think the word was clean, like the way the writing of it was rendered was really good. And so there's a lot that I like about the book in terms of the writing, in terms of the structure. But I think as a story, I wondered, am I the right audience for this? And,
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, as those of us, since we do a lot of reading of a variety of books, how to situate this in that context. And so I just
Mm.
sort of wanted to throw that out there. And not to, make it a good or a bad, but just, as a book club, as a casual book club, I wonder, are is- some of some of the things that as the college embarks on bringing different writers, the question of audience comes to mind, because I think the way this book may be used is to try to show students a struggle that is somewhat overcome by the protagonist, or there's some bigger meaning about belonging that I think there have been plenty other texts that may fit in that same vein. So I've just, wondered about that, and it was wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, that's a very I definitely got the same sense of it being more of like a YA young adult novel type of feel. Like I think you're right. The idea of I think we call it a Bildungsroman, right? Like a coming of age story where you have all of the characteristics of it kind of checked off, right? Like you were talking about some of them, Kofi. And I was wondering the same thing, like if our students, college students, younger college students, are the audience for this, then what are they meant to take away from that? Because, spoiler alert, the main character drops out of college and, for all intents and purposes, doesn't go back, and the book is aptly titled Everywhere You Don't Belong. So I was wondering, I was just scratching my head at some point and I was thinking, and for our listeners out there, you'll get a sense of why it's called Everywhere You Don't Belong, because that's kind of the central focus of the novel is this young protagonist, Claude McKay Love, is trying to find where he belongs, where he fits in. It's not home, he needs to get out of there, but at the same time, he doesn't want to get out of there, but at the same time, where he goes is not exactly a place of belonging either. And, it's just a really interesting idea that, I don't know. I was surprised because I wasn't expecting the book. Is this the Book Connection book? To be about a protagonist. Yeah. But I think it's like, isn't it connected with our Book Connection book of the year or something like that? Yeah, I think we chose it. We chose it. So I think it's an interesting kind of, it's an interesting message, I guess, right? Everywhere you don't belong. And then the main character just drops out of college and then flees to an island on a beach or something somewhere, you just don't know. But I agree with you, Kofi. I thought the writing was really clean. I thought it was, I was laughing at some points, just the comedic timing of some of his lines are just cracking me up. And just the way he brings these characters to life, like Paul, who just was hilarious. He was just one of the most memorable characters I've read in a long time. And the way that, and also sad, but really funny. And, I just thought he did a great job of kind of capturing that, those background characters but not keeping them as these sort of flat one note characters either.
Right.
I loved Paul. I think I think Paul was funny and tragic and comedic and all of those things rolled into one. And that character was the one that I could really picture being in a TV show or a movie, right? I mean, I could imagine the whole novel as a movie, but I really could picture Paul sort of in his actions or words and so on. But it took me a while in the beginning to understand the relationship between Grandma and Paul and the rest of the characters. But I want to kind of go back to what you said, Sylvia, about the belonging, that question. And what the book is basically the character trying things out and trying out different people too, right? And is this it? Is this where I belong? Is this who I'm meant to be with? And is this my person? Are these my people? Or is this what I'm meant to be doing? And I was really struck by how determined Claude was to leave and to go to this college, even though he had these questions about shouldn't I, and everyone else is saying you shouldn't go. So that determination, I wonder, where did that come from? And it seemed not necessarily about getting a college degree necessarily, even though he wanted to become a journalist, but about going on that search to find the place, right? The place where he belongs. And so you're right, at the end when he doesn't stay and he says, I don't belong here. And he said that several times, right? Towards the end of the novel, I don't belong here. It made me sad, but it also made me check my, what do I want to say? Assumptions about what it takes to pull yourself out of a bad situation, that it has to be college. And that I thought of that as, oh, good, he's going to go to college and make something of himself. And I think that is the reader assumption, right? And actually just my class the other day, we were talking about myths. And one of my students said, I think one of the more deeply held myths is in America is that you have to go to college or you don't have a life. You can't have a
Mhm.
successful life if you don't go to college. And which I hope she'll pursue that in her paper when she writes about this. But so it really did make me as a reader check that assumption. And she says, oh my gosh, what is I'm blanking on the friend's name. The
Which
the
one?
girlfriend, sister, girlfriend,
Janice?
sister, friend. Yes.
Was it Janet? Yeah. Oh,
She says several times, we can do anything, right? We can go anywhere and we can do anything. And when she said that, and I actually listened to it on the audiobook. So the way she said it, um, the way it sounded to me in the audiobook, like I really believe that, like, yes, it made me think I could do anything. And so I love that comment. And I think at the end, that's what they do, right? To see if they can, in fact, do anything.
yeah. One of the other things that was sort of sticking in my head was the name Claude McKay Love, and I don't
I
think
was
it's
just about to say
accidental.
that.
The Jamaican American poet, who's famous. One of his famous poems is "If We Must Die," and
Hmm.
that is about really fighting for your place, right? You're not going to die like a hog. You're not gonna accept the inglorious spot rather, or you're not going to be hungry or go through these pains anymore. So you're going to fight back. And I didn't necessarily think that that's what Claude McKay Love was doing. Felt like he was running in some ways or trying to find some mythical place, where I guess he kind of did find, that I wondered if was it really about, say a young African American male's coming of age, or is it about this particular person representing an idea of what belonging can be, which sort of kind of goes a little against the grain of who Claude McKay was as a writer. But I that kind of stuck in my head. Like, you're signifying at one end, but you're doing something a little bit different on the other end. So I there was so many things about the book that kind of made me wonder, in that regard, in terms of literature and using certain tropes or certain motifs, like referencing sports figures, most of them black male sports figures, as sort of these heroic symbols or symbols of, I'm thinking about the early parts when he was talking about watching, or not watching, but the whole thing about Dennis Rodman, who he never really fit in anywhere if you think about it. So I was looking for a kind of symmetry that would connect back to Claude McKay. I don't know why. Maybe that's just my reading sensibilities. And it just didn't hold up in a way for me on that regard. And that's not fair for Gabriel Bump. But if you're using a name like Claude McKay, you have to understand that that's signifying something. And I would be curious on the use of that name and some of the other names.
So
You can ask
I
them
had
on the
this.
22nd.
I had a very, I had a very similar experience because that was the first thing that stood out to me about the book when I picked it up. That the protagonist is named Claude McKay Love, and I thought that's a very, like, a lot of times authors will name characters after other, like, literary figures, but rarely do I see someone actually take the whole name, like Claude McKay, in a way that's really obvious. And so I thought, okay, he really wants us to know that this character is, alluding to this poet. And so I had the same sort of struggle with as you did, Kofi, in trying to figure out, like, because If We Must Die is a poem that, in class I used to teach, and I can kind of see echoes of that poem, right? Let Us Die Fighting Back, in that last kind of climactic scene where he and Janice and is it Juna, their new friend Juna, are kind of like in this like showdown at the motel. And there's like
Right.
bullets and violence and everything. Like, I can see sort of echoes of that poem, but throughout the whole novel, I was trying to figure out the significance of naming your character directly after such a well-known, figure of the Harlem Renaissance, and like, adding love at the end of that name as well. And trust me, like I did all sorts of literary mental gymnastics and trying to like make the connections. And then I realized, for me, characters like the ancillary characters like Paul, Grandma, Janice, like they started to serve as a sort of chorus for me in terms of the poet, kind of like in a Greek, like, or a classical play where you have, the character kind of going through these things, and then you have a chorus, kind of, bringing in their different dimensions, and their different perspectives. So you have Grandma, who's just like tough as nails and, loud about it. And then you have Paul, who's just, this really emotional, like, being who lives in his own body, very, very much so. And then you have Janice, who to me was the strongest one of those voices. And so I kind of like, they're kind of like a chorus. And then I shifted my idea like later on, and I thought maybe they're kind of like muses, in the sense that a poet has, these different like sources of inspiration, that are kind of informing their different, choices, even poetic choices, but in this case, like choices in life, or not, And so I think I couldn't really get a sense of Claude himself, like, as a character over the novel, in the sense that I get some other like characters, until the very end, when he begins to start making these choices, like, moving away for college, or, leaving college, even when he gets there and he doesn't really fit in. And, the newspaper editor and the faculty advisor are basically telling him to solve racism, or, like, be the Black voice on this giant university campus. Even then, he doesn't really say anything. He doesn't want to do it, but he doesn't confront that. He just sort of, Janice appears, and then he sort of runs away, to go be with her. So these things all happen upon him, and then I don't know. I just was trying to kind of make that final connection between how these muses, or maybe the chorus, kind of informs who he is. And then the ending sort of just, like, I felt like they put the ending in a raft and sailed it out to sea. And, I'm not mad about it, but it's just interesting. It made it hard for me to kind of, like, I struggled with the idea of like the name of the character as it relates to the poetic figure. And then maybe that's my hang up. But then, why name your character so, like, literally after, the poet? I don't know.
Yeah, it's like if I made a character named Ralph Ellison Johnson. People are not going to pay attention to the Johnson. They're going to pay attention to the Ralph Ellison part. And
Right.
So, or Zora Neale Hurston McGillicuddy, or some other. So it's like,
That should be a next character in your writing, Kofi. I think this character might write itself. Zora Neale Hurston.
Just with the name. Yeah. That's awesome.
But when you signify, or you're signaling out to things, it conjures up in a reader. Now, again, that's why I go back. Am I the reader for this? Because I imagine, and I might be wrong, but I imagine a lot of younger audiences might not be familiar with Claude McKay. They might not be familiar with some of his work. They might not be familiar totally with the Harlem Renaissance, to be quite honest with you. So it could be something to trigger a younger audience to say, well, let me find out more. But they would have to know that Claude McKay is a person who existed, right, and not just a fictional name, And so I think that's a little work in a young adult novel that I'm not 100% sure the readers would automatically go to. And quite frankly, even those of us who might use the book in the classroom, if they're not aware of who Claude McKay was, they could like move to kind of oversimplify his characterization, because I think he is kind of a complex character. Bumps Claude McKay love, but I don't know if he was fully drawn even by the end. I think I was doing a lot more work to draw him out because of the chorus, if we look at it, or muses, or because of the other characters surrounding him, in a way, if that makes sense.
Well, maybe that's the point. Yeah, I mean, I felt the same way, Kofi, and I think now that you're talking about, like, maybe that makes sense. Like, maybe Claude McKay Love is supposed to be like this every man, or like a insert name here, and you see that's a common trope in some literature where you have a stand-in that's supposed to represent just anybody could be that. And certainly in this case, it's not like anybody in the world. I think there's a very specific, I guess, audience, or not audience, but type of person, someone who grows up surrounded by what feels like or felt like reading in the book, death is everywhere. And it is, it can just be sudden and routine almost. It's almost like, the expectation is death, and that to me is very reminiscent of If We Must Die, the poem by Claude McKay, which just feels like if we must die, even the title of it suggests that they must die. So if we must die, then we might as well die on our terms, and that to me was one part of the book that was very clear to me, like the idea that if I stay here, I'm going to die anyways. If I leave, it turns out like he leaves to escape the racist structures and systems in the South Shore of Chicago, and he leaves to Minneapolis, which I thought was right. Was it Minneapolis or like Missouri? Was it Missouri? It was somewhere where I was thinking, when was this book published? And I looked and it said it was published in 2020, and I was like, there's nowhere you can go. There's nowhere you can go where you can escape death if you are a Black man in America, or a woman, especially in this, growing up in this setting. And that part to me was very apparent. And then the character of Claude McKay to me was not as clearly like cemented. And then now I'm thinking maybe that's why, and then the one thing that he does do to kind of make himself distinct from other characters, of other everyman characters, is to basically say, fine, if I'm going to die, if I must die, then I'm going to make these decisions and go to a beach somewhere and live with Janice and not worry about college and just leave it behind. But anyways, yeah, that kind of sparked that idea, Kofi. Thanks.
I mean, I think at the end, when basically the last chapter, or even the last line, I think that when he says yes, period, right where we belong. Well, I wondered, like, what is he referring to? And I think the only answer I could come up with is this place, which is on way somewhere, or in the process or the journey of getting somewhere, or being free from wherever it was they were trying to leave. So you're right, Sylvia, it's not clear, right? But again, maybe that is the point, that we sort of see the characters at the end about to start on a journey of further exploring where they belong. But it's interesting to me that the very last line is that the last line? Yeah, the last line of the novel is right where we belong, when they are not in any particular place, right? They're in transit on their way to the ocean, for example, with Juna. So it maybe in transit is the where we belong. I don't know.
Oh, I love that. I like that reading. Or like they're nowhere.
Yeah,
they don't
yeah.
say where they are. they're nowhere, so they don't
Yeah, so it's
belong.
the
They
openness
belong
of
in
it.
nowhere.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. But the idea that you belong nowhere, and for them nowhere is this beach. Hypothetically. For a minute I thought they died and this was like some sort of a heavenly trope or something like that, like you know
Well,
like
because if you think
in
about
the
it, these
movies.
I was going to say, it seems like all these sort of institutions that they have tried to belong to. First with family. I mean, if you think about family as an institution, right? And then school,
Yeah.
or even the idea of a movement, like a civil rights movement that took place in their neighborhood, or they try these things, and in college, right? College obviously is an institution, and so they try these things,
Mhm.
and um it they don't feel they belong there. And I really felt like that scene when the advisor to the newspaper comes in and kind of, is it fair to characterize it as ranting about, like, you don't believe in anything, you don't know what I did to get to where I am. And I felt guilty. I felt like, oh, this is feels like a criticism of us, in higher ed, in college, like, I don't know, and just the sort of the gap or the shift in the generations, like between the generations, about what matters to us and what matters to them. So I really read that part as like I paid attention to that part, like, oh yes, tell me tell me more about what you're trying to do here in this scene. And Yeah, so these institutions not working out for Claude, and then sort of being out in the free open road with Janice, like, just, I guess, trying to figure out where they want to be. I think, yeah, I just thought of that phrase, in transit, but I think maybe that's the best for me to characterize where we end up. Where they belong is in transit.
Yeah, I like that. That makes sense. But it's also true that there are in those institutions people who actually belong in them, and or they find meaning in those institutions. So Big Columbus, he finds meaning in, what are they called, the Red Belters or something like that. And so there's meaning there. The coach, there's meaning for him there, and I think the advisor, for that person, they found their belonging, right? They found the place where they belong, and it was within that framework. Whereas I guess for Claude and Janice, they represent a type of, I guess you're right, generation difference where, if we, I guess I would technically be Gen Xer, and it's, for me, certain institutions matter, and for those who might be in the Gen Z category, it might not. So they're in transit, I guess. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Look at you. Look at us.
It's the
Did you
hive
freeze?
mind at
Oh.
work.
I'm gonna
Oh.
drop my mic. I think that's it for today. That's all the time we have.
That is all the time. Next time we will be talking about children's books, not necessarily children's literature, but it could be children's lit. But it's books that we enjoy that are typically for a very young audience. If you want to follow us, remember you can follow us on YouTube. We have a Facebook page, and we have, what is Podbean? I always get this wrong. Podbean.howardcc.edu.
Nope.
That seems right. No. I get it
Dragon
wrong.
Digital Radio, right?
Dragon Digital Radio. Oh, that's right. But that too. Yes, Dragon Digital Radio.
.podbean.com.
Okay, .podbean.com. We're gonna get that I'm gonna get that together.
Good try, Kofi.
Well, I shoot for the stars so I can be amongst the moon.
I think it adds character to our show that we can't
I
get
think
it
so
right.
too.
That we're so super casual, we get things wrong.
That's right. That's right. All right.
Enjoy seeing
See
you
you
guys.
next time.
Take care. Happy reading.
Bye.